My name is Zahra Nader. I am editor-in-chief of Zan Times, an Afghan women-led media that covers human rights in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. What the World Press Freedom Day means to me, especially now in Afghanistan, is Afghan women journalists still continuing to cover the crimes that the Taliban are committing against them. It is them reporting on the loss of their own rights and freedom in Afghanistan, despite the restrictions and the crimes that the Taliban have committed against them. The Taliban have waged a war on women's rights in Afghanistan, and still there are journalists, especially women, who are reporting despite being banned and erased from society. That's what press freedom means to me. It's not about the right to speak, but it is about the right to be heard. And I really hope in this day the world listens to Afghan women journalists.
1 minute on the nose. How fantastic.
Okay.
How good are you?
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you so much, Zahra. Okay, it's great to hear your point of view on the situation in Afghanistan, and we're going to get into it now as we embark on this short interview with you. Zahra Nader, you set up Zan Times with other Afghan journalists in August 2022. The de facto authorities seized power a year earlier, and your team, I should say, for Zan Times speaks Farsi, Pashto, Uzbek and English. And in addition to news reporting, Zan Times covers human rights violations in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan today. Why don't you tell our listeners and viewers one of your biggest stories, please, one of your most hard-hitting updates from the country?
Over the past almost now 4 years that we are doing this work, we have done many stories. And our point of view have been covering human rights stories, especially those that are not really being covered by other media outlet, or it's difficult to cover, like investigation into the Taliban's crime. To give you one example, in December of 2023 and January of 2024, we received the reports that the Taliban are increasingly set up checkpoints in some parts of Kabul, particularly Hazara neighborhoods, and they are arresting girls on charges related to what the Taliban called bad hijab, meaning women who were not completely obeying the Taliban's full dress code, which was covering themselves head to toe. We spoke to some of these women. They told us that some of them have been arrested for just wearing a sneaker. Some were arrested for having jeans. While they were wearing very long clothes, which to them was totally fine, and observing the Taliban's dress code. But the Taliban arrested them anyway. We reported this story, and the Taliban actually confirmed that the arrest had happened, and they called it, we only advised this woman, and we asked their families to come and know that these women are not observing the Taliban's dress code. But what happened is that immediately, just a week later, the Taliban retracted those comments, saying that the arrest never happened. They started organizing mullahs or religious scholars in different mosques in different provinces and pressure them to come out and say any reports of arrest was a lie, that it did not happen, that no woman stayed overnight in the Taliban detention for the violation of dress code. The catch in this was because the Taliban framed themselves to be, branding themselves as defenders of religion. And in Afghanistan, culture and religion, it is not appropriate for girls to be imprisoned alone by themselves without a male chaperone, because the Taliban required women who are going out to be accompanied by a male chaperone. Yet they have been arrested and spent nights in the Taliban prison without a male chaperone. So we ask ourselves why the Taliban are doing this. We investigated, and we find out actually some of those women who were detained, they were sexually harassed, and unfortunately they were raped in the Taliban prison. That's the story that the Taliban wanted to cover up. We broke that story. We spoke to this woman, and we actually find the family of one girl who was arrested and imprisoned for 2 weeks in the Taliban prison. And the night that she was released, she unfortunately ended her life. We spoke to the family of another girl who was arrested on the charges of bad hijab, and weeks later, her body was found in a sack in parts of Kabul. Her family didn't manage to get justice. When they went to the Taliban arrested them. So that is the kind of story that we are covering and trying to tell the world of what the Taliban are doing in today's Afghanistan.
Those are incredibly hard to hear, those stories, and the abuse that those girls and young women suffered, unimaginable. But I mean, how literally do you manage to report on this, given the obstacles that you're talking about and the retractions from the de facto authorities? How do your reporters and your colleagues in Afghanistan actually go about this? I should explain, you are not in Afghanistan. You are talking to us from Canada today.
Yes. So I work, this is very interesting to explain to you how do we work. We call ourselves the Newsroom in Exile. I do work with a group of mostly Afghan women journalists, both inside Afghanistan and also in exile. It's not exclusively women. We do work with male journalists as well. Initially, the investigation, the information is being shared by our colleague inside the country. If it is safe and if they deemed it is safe, they will investigate, they will work on the story, and they will speak with the people who have been affected, like the families of these girls. Some of these were interviewed by our colleagues on the ground. But in cases where our colleague inside Afghanistan cannot investigate a story, for example, there was the death of a female YouTuber. She was very famous. She was killed. And two of our colleagues inside Afghanistan attempted to follow up her story, investigated, and speak with the people involved. But immediately they received threats and phone calls, and they felt that they are being followed. So they stopped investigating that story. They passed the information to our team in exile. And those of us in exile, we conducted the interview, we followed the story, we investigated from exile. And sometimes exile have been a blessing for us, because when we called people who are suffering, whose rights have been violated, they are more willing to speak with us, because they feel we are not immediately in the hands of the Taliban. The Taliban cannot arrest us. But the journalists who go to their home, they are at risk of being arrested by the Taliban. That's why sometimes they trust us more and are willing to share their story with us.
Thank you for explaining how you go about your work. I wonder if we could talk about another story. There was one earlier this month you wrote on Zan Times, where you were describing the two things, really. It was the impact of a Pakistan airstrike on a drugs rehabilitation center in Kabul. That was one part of the story. The other part was the de facto authorities' responsibility for the high numbers of casualties, because you found out that patients had been locked in their rooms. They couldn't escape. Can you describe the challenges of this and how you go about covering a story like that when you don't really know what you might expect, and how much freedom and what decision process is on when to step back from a story because it's not safe to go any further?
Exactly. So this story that we worked, this story did not, for us, it did not started with the airstrike. We have been following the situation of people who are struggling with drug addiction for a very long time. We did an investigation in 2023 where we looked at the violation that the Taliban were committing against people who are suffering from addiction. So these people, the Taliban, made a law, and they went about rounding up these people from the streets, bringing all of them to what they call a rehabilitation center. These were not rehabilitation center. They were prison, effectively prison. These people were being imprisoned. Some of them have been brought to that center 3, 4, even 5 times. They were locked up. They did not have access to food. They did not have access to proper clothing or shelter, and even proper doctors when they're being forcefully going through withdrawal of drug. So this what the Taliban did is, for them, there is two ideas. One, that they want to show to the public that they are this successful with combating drug addictions in Afghanistan, because this has been a problem which supposedly the previous government failed to address. So the Taliban are now the hero. They are there to address this issue. In front of the public were going along with this, because they were saying, oh, we are not seeing drug addicts on the streets, so this is a good sign. There was on a bridge in Kabul, very famous bridge, for years drug addicts were sheltering there and were living there. The Taliban raided that place. They took all those addicts to the center and then cleared up that bridge and painted and called it, Bridge of Khoshbakhti, means good luck or good fortune. But what happened to those drug addicts? They were suffering, their rights were being violated horribly and brutally, and nobody was really paying attention to that. So when this strike happened, the Taliban were immediately came out in just 4 hours, came out and said, do you know 400 people have been killed? But our bigger question,
400? Did you say
why?
400?
400, yes. Within 4 hours, the Taliban put that number out there. But by the end, they were saying 406, I believe, people have died there. So how does this big number come? For the Taliban, this is a claim of like, look what the Pakistan did to these people. But this story, there is more responsibility with the Taliban because it was the Taliban who brought those people, most of them against their will, to that place, kept them like a prisoner. And then when that strike happened, those people killed there. And still some of their families do not know what really happened to their relatives, to their loved one. That's the story we want to tell, that yes, Pakistan have the responsibility for the strike, but why those people were there in the first place?
Thank you. Zahra, can you tell me, staying with that story, how many reporters would be required, or how many would you need to really get the full investigation done? I'm just trying to figure out how many resources you have, and also how can you vouch for all of those who give you information?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important question to answer. For this story, I think we collaborated for 5 people, two of them actively going to hospitals, talking to the people. So what was interesting was the Taliban actually limited access of journalists to the hospitals where these people were being treated. We sent 2 different journalists. I'm not going to give a lot of details about who they were because I'm worried that I might put their life at risk. But they were people who were allowed to work. And we collaborated with them. They went to the hospitals. One of those journalists told us that the Taliban have soldiers standing up, agents standing up in front of the hospitals, questioning people who are going in. Why are you going in? What relation do you have? Why do you need to go and see who? That kind of information is being asked at the door. And once one of them get inside, a doctor told them that if you're a journalist, we will allow you to conduct interview as long as you're asking positive questions. There should be no negative question, meaning any question that bring any negative light on the Taliban or that mentioning that these people suffered under the Taliban, those are negative questions that must not be asked. And we had many questions which our journalists could not ask because they were too fearful that if they asked those questions, they might be immediately arrested in there. So they really limited their questions that they asked there. And also we collaborated with other people who went to the families and relatives of those people and asked them about what really happened when they were taken, what they were their experiences. So these are the kind we are covering Afghanistan through the eyes and experience of the people who are suffering, not through the Taliban statement and what they claim that they are doing.
So there's a real element of fear and self-censure, isn't there?
Exactly.
Which you have to juggle all the time. The point is you're getting the story out, I suppose. Another question to you, Zahra. You you clearly have a massive contacts book, and you know a lot of people, and you have a lot of stories that you presumably can and can't tell us. But how do you measure your impact? Because the people of Afghanistan, I doubt they can read your stuff, can they?
Although thankfully our website is still accessible in Afghanistan, so people can read our stories,
Ah,
our Farsi website in Afghanistan. But about impact, so how do we measure our impact? This is I would say, emphasize in 2 issues. One, as I earlier mentioned, the press freedom for us is not only about the right to speak, but it's also about the right to be heard. We are providing the people of Afghanistan, particularly women, LGBTQ people, people who do not have access to power, we provide them with a platform to be heard. That's important. Many of the people who talk to us, I remember there was one woman who was actually, unfortunately, brutally raped by the Taliban when she was in prison. She told us, I might not survive this, but I want my story to be told. That's why I am talking to you. That's why I'm giving an interview to you to ensure that my story of being told that how I was violated. And then second is that we are providing an opportunity for Afghan women journalists, for journalists in Afghanistan, independent journalists, to be able to do their job, to do their duty of covering truths and reporting it. And we are providing that opportunity to journalists, particularly women journalists. We recently launched a fellowship in Afghanistan asking for 10 women journalists to join our fellowship for 10 months to learn and also to work at Zan Times. We received 860 applications from women living in 31 of Afghanistan's 34 provinces. That's a huge number for just 10 spots. That means that these women are ready to work, but they don't have an opportunity. That's why it's important for us to be there and to provide this kind of opportunities for them to continue their work. Even if they're imprisoned in their own home, there is a way that they can cover their community. There is a way for them to be the voice of women in their community. And we are willing to provide that opportunity. But unfortunately, newsroom like us, we don't have funding, we don't have a lots of support, and this makes it very difficult to be able to continue this work. But I would say our impact is in these two ways, like ensuring that the people's voice is being heard, those affected by the violations, and also journalists, especially women, have a chance, Afghan women journalists having a chance to write their own stories, to tell their own stories to the world.
Zahra, thank you so much for joining us. And it's been fascinating talking to you and getting, this insight into Afghanistan that you have. Certainly the UN is always following what's happening inside the country and keen to stress the need for equality and for everyone's rights to be respected. And certainly we've heard that they're not being in many cases. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. And it's a really important message for World Press Freedom Day. We wish you all the very best with your work, and we hope that you'll stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.